right. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Hector Dominguez. I am part of the City of Portland Smart Cities program. I'm coordinating the work on open data, privacy, and surveillance technologies. And it is my pleasure to be hosting this morning, Portland time, this morning, this amazing panel of with people that we are really very grateful that they're joining today and also sharing their expertise to our Portland community. Thank you, everyone who's joining live here. And also thank you, everyone who's watching this live stream or this video recording. So we are going to post the recording online with the information that you're going to be seeing here with links. And the idea of this panel is to provide some framework, some ideas to be part of the motivation on how we can do better with technology at this local level, at the city level, etc. So we have an amazing list of panelists joining us. And we're going to start by introducing Helen Hayes, who is a researcher at the Center for Media and Democracy in Canada. Brian Hofer, who is the executive director of Secure Justice, but also the chair for the City of Oakland, California Privacy Advisory Commission, Professor Michelle Gilman from from Baltimore School of Law, University of Baltimore School of Law, who's doing amazing work on public participation, particularly on AI. All right. So the idea of this, we're going to have some questions that we have put together at the beginning. We're going to go around first, and then at the end, we are planning to have some questions for the audience. So feel free to share your questions in the chat, or if you feel like you can participate, please just raise your hand using the Zoom links. And so let me start with everybody. So it's a round of the first question. Public participation. We are doing that as the city of Portland. Our context has been privacy, understanding what our Portland community needs or wants to have around privacy and information protection and surveillance technologies. So, technology has some specific issues. Can you tell us if public participation in the context of technology and digital rights is any different to other public participation in housing, for instance, or in public safety, or in anything else, transportation? And let's start with Helen.
Great. Thanks, Hector, and thanks to my fellow panelists. I'm really looking forward to the conversation today. As Hector mentioned, I am the research manager at the Center for Media, Technology, and Democracy at McGill University, and I'm also a PhD candidate at McGill University, where I study the intersections of technology regulation and climate policy. And part of that work has to do with deliberative democracy and participatory mechanisms for governance. So I'm thrilled to be here today to speak about all of these issues, and thank you to everyone who's listening and engaging in this conversation as well. To answer your question, Hector, I think that public participation really is the cornerstone of democracy. It's the way that we understand what people need and how to make adequate policies that really address people's concerns. When it comes to technology and digital rights, I think public participation is absolutely necessary for a host of reasons, but particularly because technology infiltrates all of our lives. As we know, we use social media to connect to friends and family. We go online to do our banking and to order groceries. And more digital technologies are also starting to be deployed in key sectors like policing, like the medical space. So we really need to have people's participation in these conversations about how we regulate online platforms and digital technologies, because we're more and more inundated with them on a daily basis. And with technological change happening so rapidly, it's important that we hear on the ground experience from people, how they're using the technologies, what's working and what's not, so that we can really hold platform companies to account for the ways that their technologies affect our lives.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Michelle.
I have to unmute my own technology. Well, I mean, I think in some ways, the idea of participating in technology is very linked to other areas where we expect public participation, right? And these are areas where our lives can be deeply impacted by government decision making. So, for example, if you think about decisions about the environment, since the 1970s, it's been a legal requirement that the public participate and have a voice in decisions impacting their environment, right? We know in your own city and every city across America, when important land use decisions are being made, the public has a right to participate. So when we talk about public participation with regard to technology, we're part of a tradition that recognizes, as Helen pointed out, that it is essential to democracy for people to have a voice in systems that are impacting them. And as Helen said, technology is everywhere. You can't participate in modern life without coming into contact with technological systems, but they present very unique risks and harms on a scale that we haven't seen before, right? We know that many technologies are infected with different forms of bias and can discriminate against different groups. And at the same time, it can be hard to understand how that's working, because as a regular citizen, we don't have access to the data that's being fed into an automated system. We don't know how that system is working. So we have major impacts on people's lives. We have a potential for discrimination, but we don't really know how they work. Right? Some people call that the black box problem, meaning your computer is like a black box and we don't know what's happening inside of it. So the stakes are so high. So we need to continue the long legacy of public participation in this country and bring it into this realm of technology.
Thank you. Brian, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I'll be very brief since I agree with both those answers. The only, I guess, nuance I would add, and certainly definitely want to jump on the bandwagon saying it's necessary, we haven't really created the mechanism for public participation into a lot of these areas. Whereas a land use scenario, you might have a zoning appeal. You've already got your bite at the apple. Electoral politics, I get to go to the voting booth and choose my leaderships. But in the sort of privacy, digital rights, technology realm, at least at the municipal level, we haven't really created the avenue for that participation to happen in a meaningful manner. And that's something I'll expand upon a bit later in my part.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This is just the warm up. So now we have a series of questions. I'm going to go for each one of you specifically. I'm going to go in a round robin, and I'm going to start with Helen. So one reason why I reached out to Helen is because I learned about her work in Canada with the youth assemblies and around digital rights. Amazing work. So it's a national effort. And the way that they did it, they tried to be intentionally inclusive, doing this extra work of understanding what the local context. And anyways, I'm going to let Helen explain about that. So this question is, can you explain what is the Youth Assembly and the motivations to explore implementing one in Canada?
Certainly. So in June 2023, I led the Canadian Youth Assembly on Digital Rights and Safety. And this was a project undertaken at the Center for Media, Technology and Democracy to help bring youth voices into conversations about technological policy in Canada. And we decided to do this as a way to better understand how we can regulate technological platforms and digital technologies with the best interests of youth and children in mind. So we launched this project using what's called a citizens' assembly method. So a citizens' assembly is a well-established process that's used in Canada, in the States, and around the world to help governments understand key policy issues. And for our youth assembly, we brought together 38 youth participants, all aged 18, from across Canada to Winnipeg, Manitoba, for a week-long event to discuss digital policy, digital safety, technological rights. And so we did this by trying to engage as diverse a group of people as we possibly could, all young people, of course, to get their thoughts on the ways that digital technologies affect them. And so we had the goal to determine how young people understand digital rights and what policymakers can do to transform their lived experiences and concerns and considerations into policies that support their well-being online. So to do this, we had a citizens' assembly question, an overarching idea that was guiding our project. And that was, how and in what ways can platforms better prioritize youth users' digital rights? And we framed our entire week-long process around this question by hearing from experts and from the youth themselves on how we can actually transform what they're experiencing in practice to meaningful policy on the federal level in Canada. So we started by recruiting all of our youth participants from across Canada, and we did so to try to get as many perspectives as possible. So we had 18 female participants, 18 male participants, and 3 gender nonconforming participants. 27 of our participants identified with white ethnicity, 10 racialized, and 2 as First Nations or Indigenous community members. And we also made sure to include folks from both urban and rural jurisdictions in Canada, because obviously your experience with digital technologies, including internet access and bandwidth, vary completely depending on whether you live in an urban area, a suburban area, or a rural area. And so from there, we were able to get a very diverse group of folks to come participate in our assembly. We had 9 from out west, 4 from the Prairie region, 18 from Central Canada, 5 from Atlantic Canada, and 3 from Northern Canada in the territories, just to ensure that we were getting as much diversity as possible in these conversations and the policy recommendations that the youth themselves made at the end of the 5-day assembly that we held. So just to wrap up, because I know there are other questions coming, together the assembly participants spent time learning about the impacts of digital technologies from experts. They examined international governance frameworks in place right now to actually put digital policy in place. And then from that level playing field, they were able to input their own experiences and the knowledge that they learned from these experts into a series of policy recommendations that they wrote themselves at the end of the week and then presented to a series of government officials at a recommendation ceremony. And I'm happy to talk about some of those recommendations, I think, in maybe another question. But it was such a transformative experience, I think, for the participants, also for the organizers, of course, but most importantly for our government officials who were able to hear firsthand from youth in Canada about how to better regulate technological platforms.
Thank you, Helen. Yeah, it's amazing. So next question is for Brian. And Brian, we, as our Portland program on smart city surveillance, so we are following what Oakland has been doing for many years. And you know what Helen has just shared on this democratic representation at the country level, right? So it's something that we look into how Oakland has been implementing that. So trying to have a representation through the commissioners, which is by districts. It's something very similar to what we're going to have here in Portland in 2025 with a new form of government. So the question for you is, so this model that Oakland has implemented of community control over surveillance is very intentional towards the oversight of surveillance technologies. Of course, can you explain the motivations of CCOPS? That's the acronym for Community Control Over Policing Surveillance, the CCOPS model, and how can general residents can participate and engage?
Sure, happy to answer that. And I'm going to start sort of at the very beginning in Oakland, kind of where I made my name and literally stumbled into City Hall by accident and became an activist. The Domain Awareness Center, which today you would call a real-time crime center, was introduced to the city of Oakland on the consent calendar, which is for non-controversial ceremonial items, 2 weeks after Edward Snowden hit the front pages, and about 4 months after Occupy Oakland ended in a not so pleasant manner. So there's just a lot of energy, paranoia, suspicion of our governments during this time period. And the city thought it'd be a great time to introduce a citywide mass surveillance system with literally no privacy policy or guardrails in place at all. In fact, we didn't have any policies for any technologies, license plate readers, cell phone trackers, and so forth. And this system was going to aggregate all that data and share it with state and federal partners. And of course, that raised a lot of concerns. We opposed that project. And in the strangest twist, it legally survived in a very scaled back manner. And that created an ad hoc privacy commission. I was appointed to that. The council was like, okay, you guys are complaining there's no guardrails, go draft them. And Hector, we looked everywhere, federal, state, local, nobody had a model we could follow. And so we started drafting from scratch. Took about a year. And of course, as we were almost done, the ACLU introduces CCOPS, Community Control Over Policing Surveillance. And despite its name, it actually applies to all departments because at its essence, any technology, the data can certainly be obtained by the police. So we consider it all policing surveillance technology. But during the course of this crafting of this policy, we realized we needed a standing body. There's always going to be new and emerging technologies. No elected official has ever had the capacity and rarely the expertise to vet this stuff when they have 12,000 other things on their plate. They just don't have the time. There's not really an expertise on the administrative side. We don't have data scientists and ethics professionals and really even surveillance technology experts, to be frank. I often get terrified when I'm the most qualified person in the room. I'm not a technologist. I've bounced around law firms, but never at a civil rights or criminal defense firm. I should not know more than the people I'm speaking to. And so we created this advisory body. We're going to serve the city council and make recommendations, yay or nay. Here's some guardrails we think that will help differentiate between appropriate and inappropriate uses. And the ACLU model in a nutshell, every proposal, whether it's a smart city application, whether it's license plate readers used for law enforcement, has to come forward with an impact statement and a proposed use policy. You bring them forth together because ideally any red flags or even yellow flags that you've identified in your analysis are going to be mitigated by the guardrails in your proposed policy. And that's where the Privacy Commission does its work. We have 9 representatives, we have 8 council members, and then the mayor also appoints someone. We are right now, especially very diverse. We are supposed to have expertise, different skill sets, could be hardware, software, civil rights lawyer, etc. To use our expertise, also lived expertise. We've got a former law enforcement officer on there because we wanted to hear the law enforcement perspective as well. And we vet these things. We work with the administrative staff to craft what we believe are a good use policy. The model was never originally designed to stop tech. It was to differentiate between appropriate and inappropriate uses. Now, some bans, and I've personally worked on some and advocated for some, have occurred, especially in the Bay Area, sort of core, Berkeley, San Francisco, Oakland, where we thought some things like facial recognition, predictive policing analytics were just too creepy. And also just the cost benefit analysis. That's another key part of this model, because if you get approved up front, and this is really turn the status quo on its head, after a use policy gets put into place, it goes in a garbage can, it gets cobwebs on it, and nobody ever looks at it again. There's never a cost benefit analysis. We're using taxpayer money. Does ShotSpotter actually reduce gun violence? I haven't seen it, but I'm paying $5 million for it in Oakland. So the brilliant part of the ACLU model is that if you get approved, you got to come back each year with an annual report and demonstrate not only good behavior, the primary goal, but efficacy. Does this actually work? Did these license plate readers that you put all around town actually recover the stolen vehicles that you told us they would? And maybe during the course of that review, you also look at your policy. That 30-day retention period was a little too aggressive. Maybe it needs to be 60 days, or those types of things pop up during the course of that review period. And that is the standard up front and during the annual report, same standard. The benefits to the community from using this tech in a certain manner must outweigh the costs. And the costs are both to civil liberties and to the taxpayer. Some of this stuff is kind of benign from a privacy invasive perspective, but it's also just garbage. It doesn't work. Other things, they're actually pretty helpful. We should be spending more money on that. And so it kind of helps us allocate resources a little better. And just for the record, secure justice, we don't support the original ACLU model without a privacy commission anymore. I've just got too much personal experience. I consult with cities all across the municipalities all across the country on this. And if you don't have that reviewing body, one, it takes away an avenue for the public to participate in a more meaningful manner. And two, you just don't have the expertise. Things get rubber stamped. And that's sort of been the criticism of the ACLU model, is that, you're just normalizing this. And in some jurisdictions, that's totally true. In Oakland, it's not. We definitely narrow use. We've eliminated what we believe are inappropriate uses. And so I do think it's been working that way. And although we're formal, it's kind of got more of a casual feel. People come to us and talk to us in a much different manner than they would at a city council meeting. Our audiences are generally a bit smaller, a lot smaller than a packed city council meeting. So there's more time for engagement. People get intimidated at a city council meeting speaking to their elected leaders. So we kind of take away that fear. And really the public gets a bigger bite at the apple. It's also more notice. I notice Oregon's open meeting law is not good. It's not good in California either. We have a 72-hour minimum notice. So, and by tradition, state, city, and county governments all meet on Tuesdays. So they post something late Friday, no one sees it. Even if I do see it, who can I call over the weekend to meet with? And then they vote on it on Tuesday. And so the stuff is just sliding through the radars, sliding under the radar in most jurisdictions. The police are crafting their own policies without any public input into the rulemaking process. And so the ACLU model flipped it on its head. And I do think it is a game changer in that regard.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, it's such a complex environment, particularly on these very emotional issues around surveillance technologies. So, Michelle, we just heard about like this wish of having like public participation, diversity, being inclusive, and at the same time dealing with all these very complex issues to understand, right? So one of the reasons why I reach out to you, because I really love the report on democratizing AI and making sure that people can participate. So the question for you is, so what type of strategies we can actually start using for engaging and encouraging community, particularly around technology issues, right? It's complex. How AI beyond the buzzword, what does that mean? So those is one of the challenges that we have for the day-to-day people, the daily laborers, the single moms, not people who are necessarily in technology, not people that are necessarily experts. So from your experience, how we can encourage that participation?
Sure, great question. Technology can be complex, but I really believe that people, all of us on this call right now, we are experts in how technology is shaping our lives, and we are experts in how technology may be expanding opportunities or limiting opportunities. We do have an expertise because we are engaging with the technology. One challenge is that some technologies are not very transparent about where they're being used. So we are subject to some technologies. We may not know about it. So like Brian mentioned, automated license plate readers. When I'm driving around, I don't have a way to know that I'm being picked up by an automated license plate reader. So there are some educational components that government has to engage in. And one is just educating the public about where these technologies exist. And then, as I said, oh, well, I'm an expert on how that might be impacting me. But we might also, in different participatory settings, need to have experts on hand that members of the public can consult with, people who can explain in common sense terms how technology is working and be a resource for citizens as they have questions. So I see the need, educational component, both in just helping us understand the technological landscape we live in. And then when we're actually in a citizen assembly, such as Helen mentioned, or a citizen advisory board, such as Brian mentioned, we may need people with technical expertise so that we can bring our lived expertise and our social and cultural values to the table. It's also important to recognize that people are really busy. People have a lot of obligations. People got to pay the rent, get their kids to school, make doctor's appointments. I mean, everyone's life is really frantic. And so if we are going to ask citizens for their expertise to give input in these systems, we have to make it worth people's time. We need to make it easy for people to participate. I think people should be compensated for their time because they're being called on as experts, just like you might hire a technical expert. Let's say we're holding an in-person event like what Helen or Brian are describing. We need to hold those at times when working people can participate, right? Some meetings might have to be at night. They might have to be on the weekends. It better be in a convenient location. We want there to be ample parking, but also accessible by public transportation. You got to feed people. You got to provide childcare. If you're in a community with many non-English speakers, we may need interpreters available. We have to make sure that persons with disabilities can fully access the meeting. And we need to talk to people about complex technical issues in clear language, in plain English, and so we can have an open dialogue. There are some participatory mechanisms that some governments are using that are online, right? Like we are right now, taking advantage of Zoom and this great technology. But when you're online, you have to be aware of what about folks who don't have computers or don't have internet access? How are we going to make it possible for them to participate? So there's just a lot to think about to remove any barriers to participation that might be existing for very, very busy people with a lot on their minds.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I know that we are going towards that. So, and actually, that's a very segue to the next question to Helen. It has to do with resources around what she did with the youth assembly. So can you tell us about the process, resources, on how the youth assembly works, and what is making you proud of that project?
Mhm. Certainly, certainly. Michelle, your answer, it's like speaking my language. These are all things that we were thinking about when we were deciding to host this youth assembly. Of course, we ran into some slightly different obstacles because we're working with youth. And so we have 18-year-olds that we're trying to bring into a conversation that present unique challenges, for example, having to do with school, having to do with their ability to travel. And so when we were deciding to partake in the Citizens Assembly process, we really had to make sure that we had enough funding and enough resources to ensure that we could enable all of our participants and all of our expert speakers who came in to help out were able to participate as fully as possible. And we did that by fully funding all travel, fully funding all accommodations because we held the Citizens Assembly over 1 week, fully funding all meals, offering childcare, pet care. We also made sure that we had accessibility plans in mind for folks who needed alternative modes of transportation. We had arranged for all of that. And we really wanted to make sure that the barriers to entry were as low as possible, if non-existent. So this obviously requires a bunch of money. And so we, as a research organization, depend a lot on foundations and other grant funding in order to partake in these types of projects. So we're fortunate enough to have funding from the Canadian Internet Registry Authority to help us put on this type of event and make sure that we were able to include as many folks as possible in the deliberations. What came out of that, as I mentioned in my earlier answers, was a really diverse group of people that were able to give us amazing insights into their experiences with technology and their thoughts about how digital policy can better empower youth users. And at the end of the assembly, we had a full recommendation report that's available on our website that Hector shared in the chat. It's a long 40-page report, but with a series of policy recommendations that the youth wrote themselves that were then delivered to the Canadian federal government and other provincial government stakeholders as well. And some of those recommendation highlights include the creation of an arm's length regulatory body to help technological platform companies better assess the way that their technology platforms are used. Also, the enforcement of strong and secure identification measures on online platforms, the creation of standards for platform companies' terms of service to ensure that they're clear, concise, and barrier-free. We also heard calls for mandated offline periods in academic settings, allowing students to learn instead of feeling so tied to online platforms. Also, to set all accounts for users under 18 to private without the option for them to make those accounts public, and to ensure that platform policies are up to date with the lived experiences of youth by consistently incorporating their voices into policymaking processes. And these are just a few of the highlights from the report, some of the recommendations that the Youth Assembly put together. But as I mentioned, it would be fantastic if you read the report. If you have questions or thoughts or follow-ups, I'm happy to have a conversation, because there's some really amazing ways that we can draft policy when we hear from the people those policies will affect directly.
Wow. Thank you, Helen. That's pretty amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Brian, so talking about like achievements and good work, particularly on the work on that the Auckland Privacy Advisory Commission has been doing, and your own personal advocacy and work, like spreading the model, the word, the lessons learned in other cities, of course, including Portland, San Diego, Chula Vista in California, maybe others on the way. So what is making you feel proud of all that? And yeah, can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I definitely think that any just greater public participation in and of itself is a noteworthy goal, that the public is participating more in the rule crafting process. I think that even just by itself is a win. We have not seen a lot of the oversights that we used to see previously that really led to a lot of these efforts. The Domain Awareness Center was a huge oversight, no guardrails in place. That gave us the Privacy Commission. San Diego rolled out their smart street lights. Nothing worked except the one part they didn't talk about, which was the surveillance cameras that the police were using secretly. That led to the opening. That's why they brought me in to consult to get their surveillance ordinance and privacy commission modeled off of Oakland. Chula Vista, first in the nation to have special authorization from the FAA to fly drones all over the entire city at lower elevations. It scared people, led to their privacy commission. We've had 5 sanctuary police chiefs that I've worked with personally that just through pure negligence didn't understand what, the difference between opt-in and opt-out. And the particular model, the vendor they were using commingled databases together and also has a contract to directly provide data to ICE. And ICE was, in theory, at least able to query the data. And it put those people at risk. And then they have to go out and apologize to their community, like, hey, sorry, we didn't check this box appropriately because we didn't even think about it. So the ACLU model forces you to address all those questions, and we aren't seeing big, significant, harmful oversights like that occur as frequently. So I think that's a win as well. I'm in this weird category of I've probably helped ban more technology than anyone in the country, and I've also definitely by far written more use policies than anyone in the country. There's 22 of the original ACLU model surveillance ordinances across the country. Only a handful have a reviewing body in the middle of it, but I work with all of them. It usually comes down to resources, who's doing a better job. No one has a perfect model that I could point to. On paper and in practice, Oakland is the best. It is the gold standard. But part of the reason we're able to achieve great things and have narrow, tight use policies is our volume is lower. San Diego's 8th largest city in the country. We have, 500% more tech than we do. They also don't have any staff. We've never had any staff or funding in Oakland, but because we have a smaller universe of tech to regulate, we've been able to just do it with a volunteer board. San Francisco is kind of a little different hybrid. The Committee on Information Technology, they're actually paid city and county employees, which kind of made us nervous. You're going to kind of push back against your coworkers and friends, but they've been doing some really great work product as well. And that's, I think, just the one weakness is just the lack of resources. Oakland was in a 2.5-month ransomware attack. In our meeting yesterday, you were just sharing about Long Beach. There's a number of municipalities that haven't been taking data security and retention seriously. And I'm hoping, not that I want anything bad to happen, but I hope that we're learning lessons from these cyber attacks and data theft, identity theft, that pain is going to finally start getting governments to take this stuff seriously and actually fund privacy commissions, fund chief privacy officers, have a privacy champion in each department that can, manage their internal practices. And I do think we're moving the needle in that direction. When you think Edward Snowden hit the front pages June of 2013, it's been, more than a decade, but there's been significant legislation at all levels that have been pushing us towards greater privacy protections. And I'm very proud of that.
Thank you, Brian. And yeah, congratulations for all the good work. And I know there is so much ahead. So I'm looking forward to working with you. Michelle, we're it's kind of wrapping up this conversation, but something really relevant and important for our program is equity, human rights. That has been actually one of our major goals. How can we have people at the table that are not participating, right? So we are trying always, we are trying to ask who is not part of this conversation, who's missing, who should be here, and we cannot reach out. And sometimes, it's the reality is that there are many groups that they do not trust government. They do not trust local government for many different reasons, right? There are some other groups that they cannot really join because they are overwhelmed. They have other day-to-day priorities, right? But their voices are really important. So from your research, your experience, what can you recommend to local governments to overcome all those social, economic barriers, perceptions also that people can have for them to be able to participate in a meaningful way? So they feel like they are part of the process, that they feel that they are being heard, and we are responding to their requests.
Well, you're asking exactly the right questions, which bodes very well for the people of Portland. I mean, one basic thing to do is to remove the barriers, the nuts and bolts barriers to participation that I talked about earlier and that Helen did with her Youth Citizen Assembly. I think one thing that comes out from both Helen's model and Brian's model is that participation, it's not a one-size-fits-all situation. There are a lot of different ways to design participation that can meet people's needs. So one thing is it can be helpful to think of participation with this ladder metaphor from sort of the least intensive rung at the bottom to the most. And people might want to participate at sort of different levels of intensity, and the issues at stake might warrant sort of different levels of intensity, right? So like at the bottom level, the bottom rung of participation, you just have the government informing you about what's going on. And that's helpful, right? Like, I want to know when I'm being surveyed. Be transparent, tell me. But that's really a one-way street. It's really a take it or leave it situation. As you move up the ladder, the government might ask you for feedback. Maybe it does a survey, or maybe it holds a public hearing and people can come forward and speak for 2 minutes or something like that. But again, that's not a conversation. It's helpful. The government is gaining information, right? But we, the people, aren't really getting a say in what happens. Okay, let's say you move up the ladder a little more. Now we might be more in a realm of collaboration, right? Where there's really that two-way dialogue between government and the citizens. And that is exemplified in the models that both Helen and Brian have been talking about. And that's where people are going to want to engage. That's where trust can be built. If you feel you're being listened to, if you feel like you can make a difference. Otherwise, it can be really hard to find the motivation in a busy life to engage in these processes. So the more we have these two-way dialogues, the more government is willing to listen, to change its plans, even to abandon bad ideas and doesn't come in pre-wedded to a plan. That's where you start building trust with the community. And that's where people feel like it's time well spent on their behalf. I mean, I guess the highest rung would be giving power to the people ultimately to make decisions. Okay. And the higher rungs aren't necessarily better than the lower rungs. It depends on the situation and it depends on what the people want. And so we can invite citizens to help decide what sort of participation they want and how to run the system and how to make it meet their needs, rather than saying, this is how it's going to be. Come if you want, don't come if you don't want, right? They could really have a voice in designing the method of participation. So, the bottom line is, I think people need to feel their input makes a difference. If they don't feel listened to, they're not going to want to participate, and you're not going to have a positive outcome. In fact, you could generate even more distrust. And that's like the worst case scenario here. But the questions you're asking, Hector, are right on. And they make me think that you won't fall into those sort of traps of making people feel like their time and voice is not respected.
Thank you, Michelle. Right. Well, it's a challenge. We are trying to figure out collectively with our community as well. All right, so let's spend some time with questions before we wrap up this session. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to some final questions just for everybody, just to end the final comments, excuse me, for this panel. But we have a question in the chat. And Helen is for Helen. So could you tell us more about the civic lottery process for recruiting youth? Did you have any youth organizations or individuals themselves involved in recruiting other youth for this discussion?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that question. It's a really fantastic one because I think the recruitment process is probably one of the most important aspects of setting up a citizens' assembly or any participatory democracy process generally. So for our youth assembly, we undertook a civic lottery, which is basically a type of recruitment effort where we're picking from a pool of people who have put their names forward to participate in the process. So to get to that point, what we did was try to recruit youth participants, because we were only looking for 18-year-olds in Canada, through the school board system in the country. So what we did was send thousands of emails to every school board across the country with information about the youth assembly. So this included preparing invitation letters, our website that Hector linked in the chat, and a lot of informational resources that people could read through to get more understanding of what a citizens' assembly process is. And so we started with that. We sent out all those emails, and then for certain communities that may not have had publicly accessible email addresses or don't have the online technical infrastructure that others may have, we did a phone recruitment process. So we called schools, particularly in Northern Canada, to talk to principals, to talk to superintendents, to talk to folks who might be able to spread the word about the youth assembly. We also partnered with some civil society organizations in Canada as well, particularly Apathy is Boring and Civics, which are two great organizations in Canada that do citizen mobilization campaigns, and we got them to help spread the word about our program. And from that, we directed folks to our website, or if it was through phone, we would take their information down and they would enter their information, their contact, email address, phone, that type of information into an online form. And then we would randomly choose people using the civic lottery process. And a civic lottery is basically a way to randomly select people in a way that actually replicates the general representation of the country. So we use a model based on the Canadian census in order to ensure that we were replicating the diversity of the country in our National Assembly. Obviously, this can be replicated on a local level, on a state level, on a provincial level, or a national one. But that way we were ensuring that we could have as diverse perspectives as possible. What I will say, just to wrap up, is that the recruitment effort, I think, was probably the most difficult part of the project, because it's hard to incentivize people, as Michelle was saying earlier, to want to spend their valuable time at an event like this, especially 18-year-olds. A lot of our participants were missing their proms or were missing final exams and had to get exams changed, which we helped them out with. And so what we wanted to do is really entice people and help people along the process, from recruitment to being present at the assembly. We have what we call a civic concierge assigned to every single participant to help them through the process, to help booking flights and accommodations. And so we tried to be as hands-on and present with people through that recruitment process, and then afterwards to really get buy-in and to ensure that we're lowering the barriers to entry for people as much as possible.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Helen. So we have a comment also in the chat about the framework that the International Association for Public Participation has. And it was a comment / question for Michelle, if you were aware of any jurisdiction, city, organization, or that they were implementing full spectrum of that framework.
Like the commenter, the only situation I know where true community control is happening is in the area of participatory budgeting, which has been tried in some jurisdictions where citizens come together and decide how to spend a government's budgetary pie. You know, what they divide it up towards different services. But I want to throw that over to Brian. How high on the ladder rungs do you feel the CCOPS program is and what you're experiencing in Oakland? Because you've killed some really bad things, so you're getting pretty high up the ladder.
That's a great question. That's hard to answer. I think we're 3/4 of the way up the ladder. And I think one of the advantages in Oakland and why I think this model works, you have to have sufficient outside pressure and a legitimate reviewing body, both. It's like the expertise, but the people got to demand it. And that's kind of, I think, helped Oakland succeed. But yeah, I'd say we're 3/4 up that ladder.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. And Brian, so with Helen's comment, I was also thinking about the process for recruiting members of the Privacy Advisory Commission. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about that process and how do you find people? How do they get appointed or assigned?
Yeah, it's between me, you, and the internet. I recruited the first group, but I don't actually have any authority. It just, I had some political juice. The city council members each appoint somebody. It's not required legally from their district, but that's how it's played out politically. And then they serve X number of terms. We do have term limits, 3 consecutive terms before you have to sit out for a bit. We have the different skill sets, that we're desiring. But again, even those are just suggestive because we do want to, just leave room for, lived experience and other perspectives that we just might not have envisioned. We are having a problem. And Hector, this is a conversation you and I have had for a while, and this is where San Diego went a different path. San Diego mandates district meetings before they even go to the privacy board. In practice, it's not working. Many of the reasons Michelle raised, inconvenient times, 1 p.m. at a senior citizen center when there's only 2 people there does not give you any meaningful public feedback. The Privacy Commission was getting ready to what I call go off campus. We meet at City Hall at 5 p.m. Bay Area traffic's a nightmare. If you have a job or just have any travel distance of more than a block to do, you can't get there. So that's already suppressing public participation. COVID actually sort of helped because with Zoom, more people could participate and weigh in. So we still do hybrids, in person and remote, but we're trying to go off to community centers, other publicly accessible buildings to get a more broader, really a survey of the community norms, what the public desires. We are in a bit of a crime spike in Oakland right now. And when that happens, people, often are, let's sacrifice all civil liberties and just give the police whatever they want. And so we need to try to temper that while still acknowledging the very real problems that the folks are facing and demanding a solution to. But we have to go engage more people. That's probably Oakland's biggest weakness at the moment.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, everybody. And before we go, and I just want to create a space for you. If you have any final comments and thoughts, in a rapid round. Helen.
Sure. All I would say is that public participation is so important when we're talking about changing and evolving technological landscapes in the States, in Canada, where I live, and ensuring that we meet people where they are and lower their barriers to entry will help us make more meaningful policy that works for people. And I'm hoping that in doing that, in really trying to engage, we're going to set the stage for more productive conversation and better policy moving forward.
Thank you. Brian.
I'm actually glad you brought this question up, because one other thing, of course, I'm going to plug Oakland, but it's actually the only jurisdiction under this model where the surveillance technology vetting framework was created after the public forum, the Privacy Commission was enacted, and we did it with the administrative staff that are subject to it and have to navigate it. And I've, watching the pains as I work with San Francisco and San Diego, they didn't do that. And the people administering this framework did not create it. So, as in my activist hat, we drive from the outside, we push, but I'm also an insider. And I've just seen a lot of problems where the folks from the outside, they might not know how procurement works or just city processes, and the staff just has no idea where the goalposts are. What is the intent? What do these words mean? So just to anybody in the audience that's considering doing like what Oakland and others have done in the CCOPS Privacy Commission framework, I just strongly advise you, based on my 9 years of experience now, work together. Because while you absolutely have to have it being driven by the public, there has to be a demand for it, a desire. It can't exclude other voices, and those voices are going to be subject to this, sometimes complicated law. They need to work together.
Thank you, Brian. Michelle.
Yeah, my closing thought is we have decades of experience. We know that if public participation is built well with the input of communities, that it works. It can be time well spent. It can be money well spent. The examples that Helen and Brian are talking about today are proof of that. This isn't a pipe dream. It works. It advances democracy, but it doesn't happen by accident. It happens with intentionality. These systems, as you can hear from Brian and Helen, were very intentionally and thoughtfully designed. They've learned lessons, I'm sure. And, if they were going to do it again, they might tweak things, because it's an iterative process and it's not one size fits all. And we can always reflect and do better. But I think we have to go in knowing it can work, but that we have to be intentional about it and ask all the questions, Hector, that you're asking today. That it will increase the odds infinitesimally that it will pay off, both for government, for the citizens, for all the stakeholders.
Well, with that, thank you so much, all of you, for joining this morning. Thank you for those who joined live here to this meeting. Thank you for those who joined the live stream. And if you're watching this video, feel free to reach out to our program, Smart City PDX, of the City of Portland. The video description is going to have all the different links that we have been sharing in the chat, plus others. And hopefully, our intention is to have information available for you. Again, thank you so much. This is an ongoing work, an ongoing conversation, collaboration, intentionality, a lot of courage too. And I appreciate your help this morning.